If you ever struggled through reading a Shakespeare play back in high school, you have this guy to thank for it. The Shakespeare scholar and editor William James Rolfe was not solely responsible for legitimizing Shakespeare scholarship, but he was definitely very influential in popularizing the bard in America and introducing his school editions into the classroom. This is a copy of the Comedy of Errors, published in 1890 by Harper & Brothers in New York. William Rolfe's single-volume Shakespeare editions were originally published between 1870 and 1883. He also wrote for the Shakespeareana section in the periodical The Literary World. Now, this is all taking place during the latter half of the 19th century. Earlier in the century, Shakespeare was not really as much of a thing for American students. English literature was seen as more of a pastime for cultured boys and girls rather than something to be seriously studied in an academic setting. Students were getting small doses of Shakespeare in what were called school readers, but they were just out of context fragments and more focused on oratory rather than literary analysis. Rolfe came along as a headmaster in some Massachusetts high schools, and he started to be very influential in transitioning from classical literature, so like Greek and Latin classics, to English literature, the preeminent writer, of course, being Shakespeare. He had a big focus on textual analysis, and his philosophy was basically to include as many critical notes as possible so that the student can look at everything and decide for themselves the meaning of the text. Now, because these Shakespeare plays were being used in a classroom, he did edit some things out. This is something called expurgation, which is censorship of material deemed a little bit too inappropriate. Shakespeare, of course, has many body references in his plays. So I bought this Comedy of Errors because I'm actually currently appearing in the Comedy of Errors as the courtesan, and during the rehearsal process I wanted to add something to my antique Shakespeare collection. I didn't have the Comedy of Errors yet, so I went down to the book exchange in Ashland and picked this one up. I didn't actually use it as my script, of course. I had a script, but I did read the introduction and some of the general notes. I didn't go through all of the critical notes at the end of the play. They are quite extensive. Rolfe does include a lot of information, so I didn't look at all of that. But it was definitely interesting reading the introduction. I like that he includes extracts from several different Shakespeare scholars, so you kind of get a different view of the play through different lenses. He includes a good bit of information on the original Latin source play by Plautus. There's a whole extract from that play as well as a synopsis, so it's interesting to compare the two. I do think Shakespeare's version is probably better. For one thing, it includes a second set of twins. The original play only has two brothers. Shakespeare, of course, has the two brothers plus their two slaves, which are also twins. So it creates even more comic confusion, which is great. Something I was sort of struck by in this book was in the back they have some recommendations, some endorsements from different reputable people, which of course is very common to have in books, but there's about 4 pages of those recommendations. It just seems like a lot. Probably like, 3 or 4 would have been fine, but there's 4 whole pages. Now, not everybody loved Rolfe's Shakespeare editions at the time, although he was very popular. I found one review about the Comedy of Errors, actually, where the person was writing about 2 particular notes that he came across in the critical notes section, and he basically says, "These are useless. Why are they in here? What idiot thought that this was going to help anybody?" So obviously not everyone thought he was the best Shakespeare editor around. He also had a long-standing rivalry with Henry Hudson, who is also a Shakespeare editor, who had his own Shakespeare editions, which are a little bit different to Rolfe's, of course, and Hudson's got his own philosophy on how a Shakespeare school edition should be. And they had a lot of arguing back and forth about different things. And it's just kind of funny to read all this back and forth rivalry that went on for years and years. But anyways, if you were one of those teenagers falling asleep during a lecture about Romeo and Juliet in your English class, you can blame it on this guy and Henry Hudson and a few other influential people, but definitely Rolfe. If you want to read a little bit more about this subject, I do go into a lot more detail on my blog, which is at wondrouswell.wordpress.com.